So 268,000 Bitcoin was just stripped off the market by the Bitcoin sharks. These are the entities who hold between 500 and 1,000 Bitcoin. But we also have some interesting data showing that the typical Bitcoin whales who hold more than 1,000 Bitcoin have also been aggressively accumulating Bitcoin over the past months. And the rate of accumulation we're watching is something we haven't seen since 2012. So today we got about 6 different charts I want to show you guys, breaking down what has happened under the surface in the Bitcoin space. So we can see from this news article here, the Bitcoin sharks snap up 268,000 Bitcoin in a record accumulation spree. Okay, so we can see this is the highest amount of accumulation that we've seen since 2012. Now we can see that a Bitcoin shark is an entity holding between 100 and 1,000 Bitcoin. Okay, so again, 1,000 Bitcoin is the cutoff, but we can see that these entities have purchased more than 268,000 Bitcoin, valued at $18 billion at the current market prices. So I have a chart that I want to show you guys, and you can see this big, massive blue spike that we've seen this year in early 2024. It is the biggest spike or net position change that we've seen from entities holding between 100 and 1,000 Bitcoin all the way back since 2012, okay? But what if I told you guys it wasn't just the Bitcoin sharks that were accumulating Bitcoin, okay? The sharks hold less than 1,000 Bitcoin, but the whales who hold more than 1,000 Bitcoin have also been accumulating. So let's have a look at the article I've got for you guys here, because we can also see that the Bitcoin sharks versus whales, a different report from market intelligence firm Sentiment demonstrates that wallets holding between 1,000 and 10,000 Bitcoin has also climbed in January, jumping from 23% to 25%. So before we look at that data, I want to briefly explain who these different entities are who hold all of the Bitcoin, okay? So we can see from this really snazzy little chart here, it breaks down the different holders of Bitcoin. So we can see the miners hold about 10% of the Bitcoin supply. The exchanges have about 12% of the Bitcoin supply. And we can see the whales, which is the biggest holders of Bitcoin, they hold about 18% of the Bitcoin supply. And a whale is any entity who has between 1,000 and 5,000 Bitcoin, okay? So we're talking about the whales and the next entity next to them, which is a shark. So this is an entity that holds under 1,000 coins, okay? Again, it depends upon which classification you are looking at, but this one from Glassnode says that a shark holds between 500 and 1,000 coins. And then we have the little guys all the way over here on the right. We have the shrimp and the crabs, which is probably a lot of us watching this video today. The shrimps hold less than 1 Bitcoin and the crabs hold between 1 and 10 Bitcoin. But now that we know who a whale is, so a whale holds between 1 to 5,000 Bitcoin, I want to show you this chart, because we can see we've got some more interesting on-chain data to look at. And it says Bitcoin's pump to $70,000 has seemingly been propelled by whale accumulation. So when we zoom up under the hood and take a look at this image here, we can see that whales have been, this chart's very messy, but we want to look here on the green line on the right-hand side of the chart, and we can see that the whales have been aggressively accumulating Bitcoin since mid-2023. Now remember, what happened in mid-2023? Well, of course, this is when BlackRock filed for their Bitcoin spot ETF. I believe they filed in August. And it's interesting that we can see the whales began accumulating Bitcoin aggressively in July 2023. You guys can draw your own conclusions about what that data might suggest is actually happening in the space. But I think it's pretty clear the big boys are getting into Bitcoin in a pretty big way. And this is important to kind of think about, because the big boys don't typically get into Bitcoin at the end of a bull market. Okay, they typically get into Bitcoin at the beginning of a bull market. And we can see here 51,000 collective Bitcoin were accumulated by wallets that hold between 10 and 10,000 Bitcoin. On Sunday alone, this translates to 0.2% of the entire currently available supply being accumulated in one day. Okay, so we are seeing absolutely aggressive accumulation happening in the space right now by the whales and the sharks in the Bitcoin space. But they're not the only people aggressively accumulating Bitcoin. Okay, we can see here that Tether has purchased an additional 8,800 Bitcoin for this quarter, Q1 2024. And we can see this brings Tether's treasury to 75,000 Bitcoin. Okay, which is absolutely incredible. And when you kind of zoom in and have a look at this chart here, we can see that Tether is one of the largest Bitcoin holders in the world now, holding 75,000 Bitcoin. The only other entities with more Bitcoin that is an ETF or a public company or a miner is Fidelity, MicroStrategy, BlackRock with their IBIT Bitcoin spot ETF, GBTC with 334,000 coins, and collectively the 9 new Bitcoin spot ETFs currently hold 500,000 coins. They just crossed over that 500,000 Bitcoin kind of barrier, so to say. It's a pretty big milestone. We are going to talk more about the 9 new Bitcoin spot ETFs in a minute, but before we get there, I wanted to play a video that literally just dropped on Twitter today, okay? It was from a pretty long interview that Pompliano did on CNBC, and we're going to play a more interesting part of this video. So I'm going to turn this one on for you guys now.
We just hit a really important milestone before the halving. We just had the highest weekly, monthly, and quarterly close for Bitcoin.
Right.
And so the last 4 times that that's happened, Bitcoin has appreciated at least 300% through the rest of the bull market. Right. Doesn't mean it's going to happen again, but to have that happen before the halving, it's kind of like the demand shock happened. Now we're going to have the supply shock. Right. And so it's hard just to see how the price is going to continue to go up.
I want to ask you this question, and it goes to this, the risk on versus the inflation hedge. So I just got back from South Africa, and I literally asked everybody who was around when I was in Zimbabwe, in Zambia. By the way, the rand has done.
So before we get into the salt that Andrew Ross Sorkin was spreading on CNBC in this interview, I think the key thing I want to highlight from Anthony Pompliano is the fact that he said typically when Bitcoin has its highest quarterly and monthly close, you typically, historically, see a 300% rally after that happens in the Bitcoin space, okay? So again, nobody knows where the price of Bitcoin is going to go in the short term, especially myself and especially Anthony Pompliano. But again, historically, Bitcoin is in a very good place, okay? We're just kind of closed a very high monthly candle close, and we still have the whales and the sharks aggressively accumulating Bitcoin today, okay? But again, let's talk a little bit more about those 9 new Bitcoin spot ETFs that we mentioned before we come back and dive into a few more nuggets that we saw in that Pompliano interview. There's a 10-minute one. There's a couple more interesting things we might talk about later. But we can see here the Bitcoin ETFs amassed over 500,000 Bitcoin worth $35 billion in just 54 days, okay? So again, this is absolutely incredible, but we can see this is rapid accumulation. And we can see that since January, the 9 new ETFs have bought $35 billion of new Bitcoin, which is absolutely incredible. And we can see that this chart here from HODL 15 Capital is a fascinating one because it shows how the Bitcoin ETFs have just been absolutely dominating, okay? So you can kind of see that big red bar is the Burr Bitcoin ETF. And you can just see that kind of the yellow bars are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. That's signifying BlackRock buying more and more Bitcoin. And the dark green ones in the middle, that is Fidelity buying more and more Bitcoin. But the impact that these ETFs are having on the circulating supply is a pretty big one already. So we can see that the Bitcoin spot ETFs, let me zoom in on that chart. I want to try to make that a bit bigger for you guys so you can see it. the BTC holdings of the new ETFs already hold 2.54% of the circulating supply. So that's 500,000 coins. And when we add Grayscale into the mix, we can see that all of these ETFs collectively already hold 4% of the Bitcoin supply, 835,000 Bitcoin already, okay? And the Bitcoin ETF flows are picking back up again, okay? So a lot of people were concerned that we saw 1 week of negative flows. That was last week, but those flows have actually turned back around. And we can see that when you look at the kind of daily ETF flows, it is just up and to the right. So you can see that small dip that we saw last week. And you can kind of see how we bounced back nicely from that 1 week of negative flows that we did see from the ETFs. And that was only because we saw a large, very, very, very large amount of GBTC sold. And many people are speculating that this was because of the Genesis bankruptcy. But it really looks like the worst of that selling is once again over, because GBTC is not selling a ton of Bitcoin this week. And the flows continue. The flows are still big. They're still massive. And we can see that right now, the total net new flows into the Bitcoin ETFs, 215,000 Bitcoin, okay? So the net is when you look at the total amount of Bitcoin in the 9 new Bitcoin spot ETFs, which is obviously signified by the big bar on this chart here, the big dark green bar, 501,000 Bitcoin. And then you subtract away the amount of Bitcoin that's been sold by Grayscale. Okay, so we've seen an enormous amount of net flows into Bitcoin. 1% net of the Bitcoin total supply has been bought by these ETFs, which is honestly incredible. Now, the supply suffocation continues. Before we talk a little bit more about the supply suffocation, I want to check out the chat. We have a few regulars in the chat. We've got Austin, we've got Jack. We got Mike. Mike is saying that he's a shrimp. I think a lot of us are probably shrimps holding less than 1 Bitcoin. And what was the other entity? The crabs hold between 1 and 10 Bitcoin. We got Johnny Midas in the chat. It's good to see everyone tuning in and also accumulating Bitcoin alongside the whales in the Bitcoin space, which is pretty incredible to see. Now, if we were to come back to this original article we were looking at, something else I want to show you that's kind of caught my attention is what's happening over at Coinbase. So this chart is, again, a new chart that I haven't seen before. And we can see the aggressive supply suffocation that's happened over the past couple of months. So this chart looks at data going all the way back to April 2023. And you can see that there's not a whole lot of action happening on Coinbase. Obviously, there's a little bit, but you can see how this has really picked up since these Bitcoin ETFs have launched recently. And we've seen what we've seen is these red bars on top of this chart signify money going into Coinbase. So money is going in, somebody's buying a lot of Bitcoin, and then the orange bars on the bottom of the chart, that's showing Bitcoin flowing out of the exchange. So again, look at how big these outflows have gotten recently. It's honestly impressive just how much Bitcoin is getting dragged off Coinbase's exchange. So we can see more recently that a $1.1 billion Bitcoin buy happened this week in Coinbase. It was the 3rd largest net outflow of the entire year. So again, who is this? Is this Mr. 100 buying more Bitcoin? All we know is that we're watching a lot of Bitcoin leave the exchanges. We're watching the whales buy a lot of Bitcoin right now, and things really couldn't look any more bullish right now in the Bitcoin space. Okay, there's again, not many people were appropriately bullish enough on the Bitcoin spot ETFs. Aside from a couple of people, obviously we're talking about Samson Mao. So again, if you guys haven't seen our interview with Samson Mao, we recommend you check it out because he's an incredibly bullish man, and we had the pleasure of recently interviewing him, and he made the case for why we could see a $1 million Bitcoin by in 2024. Okay, we got Victor in the chat saying like button. The like button would be appreciated if if you guys can smash it. And with all that said, guys, really hope you enjoyed today's live stream. This was a quick one. This was a sharp one. This was a little bit of a bullish update on what's happening in the Bitcoin space. I don't know how you can cut the cookie, but either way you look at it, it is looking very bullish for Bitcoin right now. So again, stack your Bitcoin, hodl your Bitcoin, and we will see you guys in the next live stream.